Well, more back and forth over the moratorium on drilling in the Gulf. The Obama administration has asked a federal appeals court to delay a judge's ruling that overturned the deepwater drilling moratorium in the Gulf. Well, in papers filed yesterday, the administration said at least temporarily stopping deepwater drilling is critically important to protecting human health, wildlife, and the environment from another oil disaster. The oil industry as a whole has taken a major hit because of the possibility of new regulations in the wake of the Gulf spill. Joining us now to talk about what's going on with these offshore rigs is lawyer Scott Siegel. His firm represents many drilling contractors in the Gulf. And Jim Noe, he joins us also. He's Senior Vice President of Hercules Offshore Incorporated. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming.
Great to be here.
All right, Scott, let's start with
Shannon.
you. We have this legal maneuvering going on. A lower court judge on Wednesday, I believe it was, or Tuesday, threw out that ban on the 6-month deepwater drilling ban. And now the Obama administration has gone back to the next level of court to say, no, we want it instituted again. What do you think is going to happen?
Right. Well, you know, to put that lower court case in perspective, it's sort of a garden variety court case that was held. I mean, if I can boil it all down to one sentence, it is, hey, government, when you take a big action, you better be able to prove that you need to take that action on the record. And what the judge basically said is, if you have a single airplane crash, you don't ground all air flights. You address the situation, you get to the bottom of it, but then you continue on in a way that is responsible. Now, I don't believe that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is likely to overturn this decision because I think it is a very well-reasoned decision. And that said, the actual fact of the matter is though the moratorium is a good headline for how the federal government is stopping even very responsible drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not the only way they're doing it, because the bottom line is the moratorium from the president's own mouth was never meant to imply, for example, to drilling in less than 500 feet of water. And yet, we haven't seen any new permits issued for drilling at under 500 feet of water when there is no moratorium. So I suspect that unless the federal government gets its act together at the Interior Department and the Minerals Management Service level, that we're still going to have a snail's pace slow recovery for oil and gas exploration and production in the Gulf of Mexico, regardless of what the status of the moratorium is.
And with all those issues in play, Jim, I want to ask you, what is the economic impact? I mean, to jobs, to lives, to all of the other industries that are satellites out from the oil industry. What do you fear most?
We're on the brink of a real tragedy, and this one is man-made. I think, as Scott mentioned, we are getting confusing and mixed messages out of the administration. At first, there was a moratorium put in place immediately after the tragedy that applied to all offshore drilling. And then, a few weeks later, the president himself on national TV told us that the moratorium did not apply to shallow water drilling. But in fact and in effect, there is a moratorium on all offshore drilling. The shallow water operators like Hercules and others, we haven't had a single permit issued since this tragedy. We're on day 68 of this tragedy, and not a single permit was issued. What that means is we will be putting rigs on the beach, mothballing rigs, and laying off thousands of workers. This is a 1-2 punch for the Gulf Coast and South Louisiana in particular. First, they lose their fisheries, jeopardizing their tourism industry, and many of these same people work in the oil industry. And the administration, through its mixed messaging, its lack of clarity on what rules will apply and what are the rules of the road for offshore drilling, are putting in jeopardy an industry.
And both of you all have mentioned that there have been some mixed messages, different things that have come from Secretary Salazar, who has now said, well, if they're going to throw out this moratorium, maybe we'll draft up something new and different. Is that going to just ignite yet another legal challenge while we watch the Gulf basically shut down to any new activity?
Right. Well, that's certainly the risk. The government has the obligation, when they begin to regulate, to speak in a clear voice. And the fact of the matter is that in this case, the Department of Interior, if you go back 4 or 5 years, actually, as an entire department, the Department of Interior has been in contempt of court before for ignoring court actions. And we hope that's not the same path they're going through this time. They have to take seriously what a federal court judge says, and they cannot ignore it. They must clean up their act with respect to the administrative record, make sure that we're making clear decisions. You know, when there's a blowout, there are the government has to engage in trying to address the blowout itself, trying to make sure there's adequate containment policy in place, and lastly, trying to do cleanup. They've got to do all three things, and sending mixed signals is not a good way to achieve the actual objectives they need to make.
They have very tough tasks ahead of them.
And Shannon,
Scott Siegel, yes, Jim, quickly, I'll give you the chance to wrap up.
Shannon, I would like to say that let's not create a false dilemma. This isn't a dilemma between whether we could engage in offshore drilling and protect the environment. We've been drilling offshore wells since the Truman administration safely and without major incident. So let's not create a false dilemma. What we need is clear rules of the road for the administration, and we need to get shallow water drilling permits and ultimately deep water drilling permits issued by the regulators. And right now, we don't know what the rules of the road are, or when we'll be back in business.
And I know a lot of people just safely and simply want to get back to work. Jim and Scott, thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.